Welcome to Ozarks Tonight. I'm Brian Calfano, joined by our Ozarks First contributors, Amy Blansett and Nick Reed. And guys, I got a question for you. I know we like to be magnanimous as people and just really nice to those that are feeling kind of, well, they're down on their luck, we'll call it, right? I was thinking the other day, at some point, even if you're the biggest bleeding heart in the world, and I mean that lovingly, and I'm not looking at you, I only have two people to look at here, and my eyes just happen to glance towards you, Amy. But I'm just wondering, is there a point at which we say, you know, you've made enough dumb decisions in your life, we're not responsible anymore as a society. Like, we can't keep picking up the pieces from what you do. As a society, you hear people say, well, you want to help those in need. But sometimes those in need, well, they're not there because bad things just happen to them. They made bad choices, and a lot of them make bad choices habitually. Again, this is one of those topics, as you said, it's so broad. So how do we narrow it down and start talking about populations that are receiving assistance? And so in many of those, the reason they're receiving assistance is they lack either the culture that created the behavior or a culture that would change the behavior. They're living in a culture that doesn't support the behavior that we're asking them to do, or they don't have the education. So if I give you a calculus test and you've never had calculus, it doesn't matter how many times I give you the test where the reward is, here's the prize. It doesn't matter how many times I give you this calculus test. If I haven't taught you calculus and how to use the systems, you're going to continue to fail, and you're never going to get the reward of sustainability, self-sufficiency. So what we've got to look at is we keep giving this Band-Aid without saying, I really want to create an environment that creates change. Band-Aid being what, like money from the government? Sure, program, or we can talk about health instead of the idea of the Medicaid and Medicare and the reasons individuals receive those. So if you don't change health behavior, you're costing us more. And if you're not going to change the health behavior and you're costing a lot, then let me remove the insurance because you need to be responsible for the burden you're creating. But if we don't have an environment that allows for the individual to access healthy food, access safe, healthy play, and have the capacity to do what it takes to change chronic behavior, then we're going to have to continue providing the support if we don't create the avenues that allow behavior change. Nick.
Yeah. And it is broad, and there's all sorts of, whether we're talking about behavior that leads to economic circumstances or just people falling off a cliff because they're taking a selfie. We have created this culture of coddling to some degree. And it may be oftentimes out of compassion, but there is a reality to whatever the intent is. If you create conditions that make it more comfortable to be in a certain place in life, you're less likely to try to get out of that place in life. And so, and I think there's no better example of these conditions or extreme examples, but you look at like Los Angeles and San Francisco and some of these areas where they continue out of perhaps compassion to try and make it less miserable to be homeless, and then they're shocked when the homeless population gets bigger. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, if you are, let's say, homeless and you live here, but over here says, we'll make it better for you, you're going to go there. But it also makes it more comfortable. And there's just emotionally, you want to help people. But intellectually, there needs to be the recognition that that does create a certain condition, and it does make it easier for people to just sit back and because, well, I can survive. And virtually every election cycle, somebody's coming along and saying, well, I'll make it even better for you. And so it creates a real cycle of, dependency is oftentimes the term that's used for that.
Let me get specific here with what I really worry about the most, because essentially, I think you're both right in your ways of talking about this issue. And I see this no matter what we're talking about, whether it's an urban area or rural area, racial divides, the decision to have kids. If you're just some homeless person somewhere sleeping on a grate, you've got problems. But those problems, if you're single and you're not a parent, they're confined to you. It's when you make the decision to have kids and bring them into a situation. Now, I'm not saying you're doing this necessarily because you just
want to. And sometimes people had kids, they had decent income, they had a life, and things fall apart, right? But is it just me, or are a lot of people not as careful with that decision as they should be? In other words, to decide to start a family and have kids when they might be on an economic banana peel otherwise.
Very diplomatic, isn't he?
Yes. There is really interesting research in the idea of why do people have children, especially in low income. And it's very easy from middle class, I can take care of myself. I'm choosing not to have a child, one, because I have access to birth control. Two, because I realize that, I'm working and the costs that would go in there. And because I also have relationships and fulfillment in other places in my life. When we look at individuals, especially in generational poverty, the areas that they find fulfillment and connectedness is more in relationships. So when I'm not getting fulfillment at work, I'm not getting fulfillment in a social network, what I do is I create a very close network, and often that includes a child.
A kid, right.
And here, she touches on something important, and it's choices versus consequences. There was long held this, we don't call it a tradition or culture, that you did things in a certain order. You grew up with a family, you got educated, you got a good steady job, you married, then you started doing the fun stuff and you started having kids. And along the way, for a number of different reasons, there's variations of that. And we have gotten to where we not only we don't want to discourage people from doing things that may not be in the financial long-term best interest, because we don't want to be judgmental. So
maybe we do. Maybe we should.
Well, and I don't, but here's the thing. I don't think you have to even be judgmental in order to explain the real life consequences of your decisions, and that you are responsible for the decisions. We, as a society, we like to fancy ourselves, particularly with, young women, as being, really smart, educated, independent, and they're able to make their own decisions. And I agree with that. I think we should not shortchange young people or middle-aged people or whatever age, and not recognize that certain activities lead to certain consequences that may not be beneficial for people at certain times in their lives.
Yeah, well, and we got to go. But I mean, this is the sort of stuff we can continue on the podcast from the constituency with these two. Tough discussions, tricky conversations, but ones that, look, we need to have as a society, folks. And so we appreciate it. Nick Reed and Amy Blancett joining us, and we'll be back after this.